Let us pray. Father, on this day of a new beginning, we ask for your guidance in the responsibility we have undertaken and your help in fulfilling our duties. As members of this legislative assembly, may we faithfully serve all Albertans, and in serving them, serve you. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
Honorable members, first, with regard to signaling the chair about question period, we will revert to that in just a few moments. On this day, it is my pleasure to introduce to the House Mr. Terry Howe, Consul General of the United States of America, and I would ask him to rise and receive the welcome of the House. I would also beg the indulgence of the House to vary our procedure just slightly. The House will recall that earlier, and on December the 9th of 1987, in fact, that this House passed a resolution with respect to the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty. And so it is on this day that Mr. Howe, the Consul General of the United States, is present in the gallery and has earlier this morning delivered to me a copy of a letter from President Reagan, which I would now read into the record of the House. Dear Mr. Speaker, I greatly appreciate receiving your letter, which contained the Assembly's motion saluting the successful summit I concluded with Soviet General Secretary Gorbachev. The meetings mark a historic moment in advancing international security. The INF Treaty that I signed with this General Secretary is clearly a landmark achievement. For the first time in history, our two nations have agreed to reduce our nuclear arsenals, not just limit their growth. Furthermore, there is the clear prospect of still greater progress in placing East-West relations on a firmer foundation. Again, my thanks and gratitude to the Alberta Legislature for its message of support. I know the best wishes of the members go with me as I prepare for my visit to the Soviet Union this year, a visit that should be important to the safer peace that we are making every effort to achieve. Signed, Ronald Reagan. On February the 1st, 1988, as Speaker, I received on your behalf a letter from the Ambassador of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Ambassador Rodionov, in which he acknowledged the resolution passed by this Assembly on December the 9th, 1987. He also expressed appreciation in the stand of the Assembly in support of the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty, and this letter was circulated to the House leaders on February the 5th, 1988 by myself. I thank honorable members for their attention.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly today 35 energetic students, grade 7, 8, and 9 students from my hometown of Granham in the McLeod constituency. They're here for a couple of days to see how the Assembly works and to visit some of the attractions in the Edmonton area. They're accompanied by their teachers, Mr. Tremblay, Miss Gordy, and parents, Mrs. DeMar, Mrs. Hobbs, and Mr. Ostrowski. They're seated in the members' gallery, and I would ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Member for Clover Bar, followed by the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I take great pleasure in introducing to you and through you the members of the Assembly 51 grade 4 to 6 students from the Fort Saskatchewan Elementary School. Now, the principal and the social studies teacher of the school, Mr. Alexandruk, has been bringing young people to this assembly for many, many years. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Alexandruk, their parents, Mrs. Gabert, Mrs. Berg, Mrs. Kleinberger, and their bus driver, Mr. Eric Van Camp. They are seated in the public gallery. I'd like them to rise and receive the recognition of this assembly.
Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, in recognition of Government Motion Number 1, recognizing tomorrow as being the 82nd anniversary of the first legislature of Alberta and the very important role played by Mackay Avenue School in our province's and our city's history, I am very pleased to welcome to your gallery today members of the Edmonton Public School Board and associate staff, who I would ask to rise as I read their names. First is Chairman Dick Mather, Chairman of the Edmonton Public School Board, Dr. Leila Fallman, Trustee, Trustee Leon Lubin, Trustee Doug Tupper, Trustee Don Massey, and Trustee Joan Cowling. The Board of Trustees are accompanied by Mr. Strembitsky, the Superintendent of Schools, Mr. McIntosh, the Associate Superintendent, and Mr. Kostick, the Archivist at the Edmonton Public Schools Museum and Archives. On your behalf, may be welcome to this Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, it is a pleasure today for me to introduce to you and to members of this Assembly a group which has joined the ranks of champions crowned in our province. And no, they're not Stanley Cup or Grey Cup champions, so I can't make that mistake. In this case, the special guests are members of the championship curling rink, which will represent Alberta in the Canadian Legion Curling Championships in Moncton in mid-April. 3 of the members are seated with their wives in the public gallery. And first is the skip, Jerry Fisher and his wife Shirley. Third, George Congener and his wife Irene. Second, Harry White and his wife Gladys. The lead on this rink is fairly well known to members of this Assembly. He has had reference made on occasion to his proficiency as a golfer. He has also demonstrated some skill as a politician. We'll question that. Having been elected to this Assembly on 6 consecutive occasions, I refer to the Honourable Member for Clover Bar, Dr. Walt Buck. Dr. Buck's wife, Laura Marie, is also seated in this public gallery, and I'd ask her, along with Dr. Walter Buck and the rest of their championship team, to rise and receive the greetings of the special assembly.
It's also a historic occasion to have to recognize 2 members standing at the same time in the House.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Deputy Premier. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Premier dropped a bit of a bombshell where he announced that we're now going to attack the universality of social programs. Mr. Speaker, understandably, many average Albertans are concerned about this statement. So I want to ask this minister, Mr. Speaker, could the minister indicate and clarify what he meant by moving away from universality of programs, and specifically which programs he's talking about?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I dropped no such bombshell. I believe what the honourable member is referring to is a reference in the throne speech to a policy statement on social programs, which will be presented to the legislature during this session. And of course, at that time, there will be full debate and questioning with respect to the statements contained in that paper. It's true that the concept of caring and individual responsibility, respect for family and community, the aspects of universality as they apply to a great variety of programs may be debated and questioned at that time, but certainly all members will have full opportunity to make their views known.
Mr. Speaker, it wasn't mentioned in the throne speech, but this minister went outside in a press scrum and said they were moving away from universality. Surely he has a responsibility now to indicate what he meant. I'm asking this minister for one specific question. Which universal programs are on the chopping block? Will the minister tell us now? We want to know.
Mr. Speaker, there are no programs on the chopping block. I stand behind anything that's contained in writing in our throne speech, or which I say in the House. And with respect to media reports which you may be referring to, I believe one member of your own caucus has already responded to that paper publicly several months ago, so I don't see what all the excitement's about.
Mr. Speaker, what we are talking about is a statement about moving away from universality. Did the minister say the statement that we're moving away from universality of social programs or not? Are we or not? That's the question I want to ask the minister.
Be clear. Mr. Speaker, I can make it no clearer. The policy statement is referred to in the throne speech. The commitment is there that it will be presented to the legislature. At that time, all members can make their views known.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. This is absolutely and totally irresponsible for this minister to make a statement and then not come back to the House and tell us what ones are on the blocks. I ask this minister, which seniors programs are on the block? Tell us right now.
Mr. Speaker, I really think the Leader of the Opposition is getting excited over nothing and should control his indignation until such time as he sees the paper in front of him. I was asked what principles would be discussed during the policy statement. And certainly the policy of universality as it applies to any program, I imagine, will be discussed. Now, that's all that was said. And that shouldn't excite any honourable member here.
Member for Edmonton Gold Bar, and the chair draws attention that the lines of questioning really deal with statements made inside the House. Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One thing to state the principle of independence and to write it in a paper. Another thing to find out how you apply it, and in contrast to the punitive approach now taken to social assistance recipients. Is the government, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Premier, is the government considering going back to means testing? Is that what you're talking about in how you apply the principles of this paper?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can only repeat again, the commitment is there in the throne speech to present the paper to the entire Assembly. Now, why don't the honourable members wait until they see what the paper says instead of dreaming up all kind of conjectures?
Member for Little Bow.
Supplementary question to the minister. I applaud the government's pursuit of self-reliance. Could the minister indicate, in terms of the Canada Health Act, whether there's any suggestion in the remarks or in the paper that's going to be presented that basic programs that are accepted in other provinces of Canada as required under the Canada Health Act would be affected or reviewed in terms of the government of Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, one of the basic 5 principles of the Canada Health Act is universality, and Alberta supports that. It always has.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the second question to the Attorney General. Mr. Speaker, in recent days, the government had at least made some symbolic gestures to removing a long-standing injustice towards Alberta's Lubicon Indian Band. Mr. Speaker, could the minister indicate why he chose to antagonize the Lubicons by publishing inflammatory and false interpretation of this issue in a recent letter sent out to the papers?
Mr. Speaker, it was important to get the facts before the public in Alberta as to what has actually taken place in this long-standing dispute, and that was done by the issuing of a fact sheet which sets out clearly the long history that has gone on. And of course, we are still going to pursue with the federal government, and we would much prefer to pursue with the band as well as a tripartite negotiation resolution of this settlement. We have an offer outstanding at the present time on an interim without prejudice basis, which would permit the federal government to proceed with the delivery to the Lubicons of a 25.4 square mile reservation for the band, and that offer is outstanding, and we are prepared to follow through with that if accepted by the band and the federal government.
Mr. Speaker, we'd like an answer to the question about the open letter, Mr. Speaker. We know the agreement that was made apparently between the Premier and Chief Omniak, but Mr. Speaker, in that letter, the minister says that they're claiming 25,000 square miles, and it says in that letter, and I quote, 10% of Alberta, including the town of Peace River. Mr. Speaker, this minister knows that that is blatantly false. And my question is to him, why did he distort the Lubicon's position in that paper at this particular time?
Mr. Speaker, there are two actions which have been commenced by the Lubicon band. Actually, there are more than two. One was commenced in 1980, and one was commenced in 1982. In the 1980 legal action commenced by the Lubicon Lake Band in the federal court, 25,000 square miles of Alberta land was claimed. In a subsequent action in 1982, launched in the Alberta Court of Queen's Bench, the same amount of land, 25,000 square miles, was also claimed. That does represent 1/10 of the province of Alberta. And that was claimed by way of an Aboriginal title claim. In 1987, that statement of claim, the second one, was amended by the Lubicon band to claim 7,000 square miles of Alberta territory under an Aboriginal claim. The first claim remains outstanding, has never been amended, to our knowledge, in the federal court. Subsequently to that, I'm informed that a new action has been commenced against the Federal Minister of Indian and Native Affairs relative to recent events, and that is a new legal action which has also been commenced in the federal court. So there are quite a number of legal actions which have been commenced by the Lubicon band, and it was that 25,000 square mile claim that was referred to in the letter and in the fact sheet.
Mr. Speaker, the minister is well aware that this is now not the position of the Lubicons. He said himself they changed it in 1987. That's right. Why, after there was some goodwill established between the Premier and the Chief, would he go out and take the worst possible scenario? Is that helpful to these negotiations? No.
Mr. Speaker, the fact sheet sets out clearly what has taken place, and if anybody is unaware of it, I suggest that they read it very carefully. It is a complicated matter. I repeat that we have made an offer to the federal government on an interim basis, without prejudice to the rights of the Lubicon band to continue the litigation if they so wish to do. And we would much prefer to negotiate it on a tripartite basis. But as all honourable members are aware, the Lubicon band has stated their preference not to negotiate directly with the province of Alberta in this process.
although it is noted that the Premier has undertaken an initiative with Chief Aminiak to have such a provincial band discussion, and that was a very useful breakthrough at the initiative of our Premier. In addition, I can advise the Assembly that additional conversations have taken place between the Premier and the Chief, and that as late as yesterday. And of course, when the Premier returns, we'll be able to report more accurately than I can do on the basis of those conversations. So we are interested in settling this matter harmoniously and amicably, if at all possible, and that is the intention. Both the honourable members don't want to hear the rest of my answer. I regret that. But the fact is that we do wish to settle this matter fairly, and so that the federal government can go forward with its constitutional responsibilities to the Lubicon band in providing that band with infrastructure, roads, housing, schools, and health facilities, which the federal minister has indicated they stand ready to do so. I should also make it clear that in our most recent offer, it was clear that we would wish to accommodate the band's desire to establish a new community on the point of the south shore of Lubicon Lake, and that was included as part of our interim offer, which we hope very much the band will take up at this time, because it is made in good faith and the intention of trying to settle this long outstanding dispute.
Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General says that they want to get this dispute settled. And I want to come back to the Attorney General. He said they want to settle it fairly. So does everybody want to settle it fairly, Mr. Speaker. But my question is then, why was this letter put out when they knew it would deliberately antagonize the Lubicons, and was the Premier aware of this letter when it went out?
Well, it's unfortunate that people have been so antagonized by a statement of the facts of the matter. Well, if the honourable member can point out anything in the fact sheet which accompanied the letter that is in error, I'd be pleased to hear that. The fact of the matter is that there have been many people in Alberta seeking information on this matter because, unfortunately, not all the facts have always been reported accurately, and it was the intention of the government to have a letter to the editor published. Unfortunately, the editors of the major newspapers to whom those letters were sent have chosen not to publish the letters.
Supplementary, Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister. Albertans can't understand why the government has been so unreasonable and confrontational in this matter and are suspicious of a hidden agenda. Is the government's hard line based on a concern with respect to other native claims in the province? And if so, what concerns and what claims is the government have in mind?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government is not taking a hard line on this matter. The honourable member for St. Albert has a very loud voice. We all know that, but not much behind it. And
what else does he have, Jim? How about a big mouth?
In reply to the honourable member for Calgary Buffalo, I would point out that we have made a legitimate offer, keeping in mind the fact that there is, when anybody is involved in an extensive lawsuit or lawsuits, proliferating lawsuits, we have to defend the interests of Albertans, generally speaking, but we do wish to have this matter settled fairly and squarely based upon the legitimate number of Lubicon Indians who are entitled to their treaty obligations of the treaty number 8. As far as other native land claims, we are in fact negotiating with the federal government and with two other Indian bands in Sturgeon Lake and Whitefish bands in order to try and accommodate the shortfall claims that they have advanced. Those are under negotiation now, and we have appointed a negotiator. The federal government has appointed a negotiator. In each case, as have the two bands in question. Obviously, Alberta has an obligation under the Natural Resources Transfer Act to carry out its constitutional obligations. We will do that, as we did in the most successful and largest settlement, which members would be well to recall, in the Fort Chipewyan Cree settlement, which was concluded just over 2 years ago and settled at the end of December 1986. So we've been prepared in that case, and that one was where we had the tripartite discussion. We think that's the way to proceed, as we are doing with the Whitefish and Sturgeon Lake bands at the present time, rather than being blocked out of the discussions, because it is Alberta lands that have to be put forward to settle our obligations, which are constitutional and which we recognize.
Beg the indulgence of the House, we might vary from procedure on this one occasion to have the Minister of Federal Intergovernmental Affairs to revert to the introduction of visitors. Is there agreement? Mr. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to bring to your attention today, in the presence in your gallery, of His Excellency Dr. Sergio Lacayo, Nicaragua's ambassador to Canada, who is in Alberta for a short visit. Alberta's relations with Nicaragua are centered on trade in agricultural products. The province of Alberta also provides aid to several non-governmental and church groups working in Nicaragua through the Alberta Agency for International Development. This is the ambassador's first visit to Alberta, and I would ask the members of the legislature to join me in welcoming Dr. Lacayo to Alberta.
Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, I question today, the first question is to the Minister of Environment. I know early this year, early February, matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I think the province was both stunned and pleased to hear about announcement of a Daisagawa or Dayashawa paper plant in the Peace River country. We're pleased because we're making a big stride forward, and the government to be congratulated on developing a renewable resource, but also stunned by the fact that so little of the necessary procedures had been gone through, Mr. Speaker, in seeing whether or not the people of the area, and particularly some of the Indian tribes, had been consulted. With respect, Mr. Minister of Environment, his reading on review that was put in, the environment study on December the 14th, yet the announcement on February the 1st. Could the Minister tell us why the federal government was not asked to put in an impact study in that period of time also?
Mr. Speaker, jurisdiction for environment matters within the province of Alberta rest with the province of Alberta, not with the federal government.
Mr. Speaker, I would remind him that the federal government is putting quite a little money into this area, and that great people, over 25% of the land that's involved, Mr. Speaker, falls under charges of the federal government in our Indian band. Mr. Speaker, then the supplemental question is, in the review that this Minister of Environment is supposed to follow, and his history has shown that he very seldom reads his own rules, but it says a deficiency review by government agencies and other government departments were supposed to be done. How in the world did he get anything back between December the 14th and the first week of February from the other departments?
Mr. Speaker, ongoing consultation occurred with the proponent, in this case Dayashawa, with various departments of the government. They were very much involved in internal discussions with Alberta Environment with respect to the environmental requirements that we have in our province with respect to their licenses. There was opportunity in the Peace River country for public meetings to be held through 1987, and we're pretty satisfied that basically everything was followed that was required to be followed. We're also satisfied that the environmental protection standards that will be followed by Dayashawa will meet everything that we expect in our province.
Mr. Speaker, this man is unbelievable. This minister is unbelievable, Mr. Minister. Unbelievable. I think it's okay, Beauchesne. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, how can this minister go about saying there were public hearings when by his own record filed on December the 14th, not one hearing was taken east of the Peace River where over 25% of the timber will be called and where the Lubicon Indians live? How can you say that that has been covered?
Mr. Speaker, the Diashawa plant site is less than a couple of dozen miles away from the town of Peace River. Surely that if we're going to have meetings, and meetings are going to be held in the area, the meetings just as easily be held in the town of Peace River is 22 miles away or 17 miles either to the north and the south. It seems to me that we would use buildings that are available, halls that are available, and opportunities for people to gather in an appropriate occasion to have the meetings there. The meetings were held. The leader of the Liberal Party, if he still is the leader of the Liberal Party, surely knows that.
Mr. Speaker, the minister obviously needs a lesson in geography. Take his shoes off and take them out of Barhead, and he can't find his way around the province. That's the kind of thing.
Order, please. With respect to the two interchanges, they're both out of order. Perhaps we could have the supplementary question.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, this time to the Minister of Career Development and Employment. Since what should be one of the departments that has made or put input into the question of the Peace River plant between December the 14th and February the 1st. After all, there are 600 permanent jobs supposed to be created. And the Minister of Career Development, I'm sure, would be most interested in how this is going to go about. Was the Minister of Career Development consulted sometime between his vacation, between December the 15th and February the 1st, as to what he thought of the Simmons environmental report submitted on behalf of the Diashawa pulp mill?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Minister of Forestry, Lands and Wildlife. Mr. Speaker, Premier Gaddy has claimed that the corporation, Diashawa Corporation, had not expressed concerns about the Lubicon's land claim. Now, apparently, Mr. Speaker, this isn't true. The Forestry Minister was apparently told in early March. My question is, to this Minister, why did the government mislead the public by saying there was no concern expressed by this corporation?
Mr. Speaker, I find this astounding to get a question like that, because if you are a company like Diashawa, which is a great corporate citizen, makes the largest investment outside of Japan in the forestry industry of some $500 million, makes an announcement. They, of course, watch the media reports to see how it's received. They received concerns raised in the paper about the Lubicon issue and made a call to my department saying, is this, have you got this under control and is everything okay? I mean, it's a small area of concern. And, Mr. Speaker, with all respect, it was raised with them, and there was no alarmist approach in their concern being raised, and I think the whole issue itself is being overplayed.
Leader of the Representative, supplementary question, Red Deer South.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Given that there seems to have been some concern expressed as it relates to jobs in this province, could the Minister of Forestry Lands please advise this Assembly what the Diashawa plant means and other initiatives of this government in forestry as it relates to jobs in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, the basic reason for having plants like this in the province is, number one, to create jobs. Number two, it's utilizing a resource that isn't presently being utilized in other ways. For example, there are very limited uses for woods such as aspen. And so we are happy to attract them here. And what makes it so exciting, with these plants that have been announced, there's nearly 6,000 permanent, long-term, permanent jobs that will contribute to the economy of this province in a renewable resource, which is forestry.
Could the Minister continue with the rest of the Thank you.
Looking at 6,000 jobs, Mr. Speaker, that are long-term jobs in an industry that's renewable, such as the forest industry, is one that we all should be excited about.
Member for Clover Bar, final supplementary on this issue.
Supplementary to the minister. In the areas where the plants are going to be using the aspen or white poplar, are those areas going to be reforested with the same type of a tree, or are they going to let them naturally regenerate? I'd just like to know what they're doing for reforestation.
Mr. Speaker, that is one area that we're very excited about, because in Alberta we are known across Canada as having the most progressive reforestation management practices that's possible. And in the development of the forest management agreement that we will now be negotiating with the companies that have announced their plants, we have a very tough regulatory process that they must go through. It takes into account the reforestation, what kind of trees go back in those particular areas, the habitat, the wildlife, and all of those are taken into consideration to make sure that the watershed and everything is protected in the reforestation practices. In some areas, Mr. Speaker, to answer the question directly, there will be other types of forest replanted in that area. In some cases, it'll be natural regeneration.
Leader of the Representative Caucus.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Associate Minister of Agriculture. In yesterday's throne speech, the statement under agriculture was of concern to me, which says, "My government has reaffirmed its commitment to beginning farmers." And as I've traveled my constituency in Alberta in the last 2 months, I note a decrease in the number of beginning farmers that are able to stay on the farms. My question to the minister is, it's relative to the Options and Opportunities report that was tabled or made available to government over a year ago. My question to the minister is, could the minister indicate what specific recommendations of this report are in place to assist those beginning farmers that we assisted through the Agricultural Development Corporation programs after 1972?
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the question from the member, because during the time since the last session I have had the opportunity also to meet with many farmers, either individually or with groups throughout the province. And I've also had the opportunity to announce the decisions made by the government in terms of the ADC and its continued role in agriculture. The major decision that I think was made is that the ADC Corporation shall continue to be involved in the Beginning Farmer program, and in that way enhance the opportunities of young people to get into agriculture. We've also made the decision that borrowers should have the opportunity of accessing that program either through ADC or through cooperating lending institutions, and are working on that aspect of the program. We've made a decision that ADC should continue to provide direct lending service to farmers. And the Alberta government has given a commitment to development of a strong agri-food industry, which allows for farmers to have new opportunities to market their crops. And certainly the big problem in agriculture today is, in some cases, the prices of commodities, and anything that we can do to improve the agricultural marketing opportunities of the farmers all over the province will benefit agriculture.
Minister, supplementary question.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the minister. The policies enunciated are theory at the moment in terms of bringing new farmers into the beginning to become beginning farmers, because agriculture, the grain industry specifically, cannot support them. What I'm talking about to the minister, what specific policies enunciated in here, if any, that have been put in place to save the current beginning farmers on the farm, to keep them on the farm and in place, and to stop the flow that we've got at the present time from rural Alberta into urban Alberta, where there isn't any jobs?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member seems to indicate that a specific policy in the Options and Opportunities report is going to save the agricultural options of some of those farmers. Each and every one of these policy options are going to work in different ways for different farmers. And the Speaker interrupted me in terms of the specifics, but I can tell you that I'll just add that the more emphasis will be placed on the training and management assistance and the beginning farmer as recommended by the Options and Opportunities report. ADC will continue to work with the farmers, and we've introduced a number of options for farmers to resolve with ADC their fiscal problems.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate the specific policy that has been implemented that can assist the beginning farmer that comes from this report to stay on the farm? In terms of the answers to this point in time, the Minister has not clearly enunciated a specific policy. If the Minister can't, could the Minister admit to this Assembly that this report does not have any policy directions to address the question of the beginning farmers that we're losing on the farms of Alberta?
Well, Mr. Speaker, one of the concerns that we've got in terms of the beginning farmer, and all farmers for that matter, is that it depends on the kind of operation that they're in. The cattle operations were the operations in the past few years that have been in difficulty, and the fact of the matter is that we're finding that many of these people are now making prepayments in anticipation of what they think might happen in the cattle industry. And last year there were certainly more payments made than projected. But to be specific in terms of what we're doing to help the beginning farmer, we've allowed for postponement of payments. We've allowed for refinancing of loans. We've got provision for loan guarantees. We've allowed for a proportional quitclaim in order to allow the beginning farmer to stay on the farm but to lower their debt so that the payments are of a manageable magnitude. We've allowed for the assumption of mortgages so that if in fact some of the which are family farm operations, so that if the mortgage can be assumed by someone else, that can be done. And we've made a number of changes which are allowing more flexibility in terms of ADC loans officers working with the individual clients all over Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate, and the basic assumption under this report, behind this report, is that the implementation of equity financing programs, which are outlined on page 104, are the basis to save the farmers and enhance the agricultural industry of Alberta, secure the family farm. Could the Minister indicate whether the government is pursuing that policy and whether there has been any kind of request from those that have the capability of providing equity financing to farming at the present time? Is the government pursuing that policy, and is it going to go into effect, and what results does the Minister see?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we are pursuing the options of equity financing and other financial opportunities for beginning farmers and all agriculture. And I hope to have some specifics on those options this spring.
Supplementary, Tabor-Warner, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Associate Minister, could the Associate Minister indicate what steps she's taken in terms of meetings with beginning farmers across the province to ascertain their ideas on the solutions and what might be done in terms of opportunities and options?
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated at the beginning of the Minister from Littlebow's question, I have met individually with farmers in the province, and I've met with groups of farmers throughout the province. I've traveled widely during the summer and this fall, and have had an opportunity to meet with and talk to various groups and farmers.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, it's supplementary, but I may direct it to the provincial treasurer. In view of the options and opportunities or Klontz report's recommendation of vendor financing and other schemes, they all involve a certain amount of tax deductions, Mr. Speaker, for people putting money into that form of financing young farmers. Could the provincial treasurer let the House know whether he is working on a plan or a project that will accommodate the tax ramifications of vendor financing for farmers?
Mr. Speaker, although I would not want to give a comprehensive answer with respect to the tax implications suggested by the member, I can't, on the quick notice, think of any changes in the tax legislation which would be necessary to accommodate that very fact. What you would have is somebody selling an asset, which obviously is covered in the capital gains legislation already with respect to farm dispositions, and secondly, you would have somebody receiving interest on a loan outstanding, which is covered by the tax law as well. So I can't see that there's any need to consider that aspect unless the member has some unique way of either changing the way in which the income is reported or something else in mind. I have no plan to change the tax legislation, that said.
Supplementary, final one on this issue, Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, the growing number of young farm families forced by this government to abandon their futures in agriculture aren't asking for more reviews and more hearings and more reports. They want action. And I wonder when this minister will grab the bull by the horns and introduce some meaningful changes on debt set-aside, debt adjustment, debt write-down, options that have been suggested in this Assembly and by a number of farm groups on many occasions. Commit herself to a date.
This government didn't force it.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think that this government may force the farmers to take the loans in the first place. So we're not forcing them to make the decision about their financial obligations in the first place. You have to realize that the beginning farmers who have had loans through ADC have had upfront benefits. Upfront benefits. In fact, the interest incentive, if a farmer borrowed and had their interest incentive beginning farmer program reach conclusion by 1986, had an upfront benefit of $60,000. If they are just now reaching the end of the beginning farmer program, they've had an upfront benefit of $54,000. That's a substantial benefit at the beginning of a loan, where a beginning farmer certainly, we recognize, has more difficulty in meeting his obligations. That's why the benefit was up front. In terms of debt set aside, we're looking at, as I said, opportunities and alternatives. We have, in fact, allowed them to put some of the problems that they've got to the back of the loan at this point in time. We're not looking at debt write-downs. That was a statement that was outlined in the news release that I made on the Options and Opportunities report. We have to be fair to all farmers in Alberta.
Member for Stettler, followed by the member for Edmonton Strathcona, Edmonton Meadowlark, Red Deer South, Edmonton Centre, Athabasca Lac La Biche. Stettler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Agriculture with regard to the problems being faced, I guess, by our grain farmers all over the province and all over the West. And recognizing the interest among grain producers to possibly use that surplus in the production of grain ethanol, I'm wondering what efforts the Minister is making to investigate the opportunities there.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to report to the honourable member that we had asked Ken Beswick to conduct an initial study as it related to the economic viability of ethanol production within the province. We received that study, but there were a number of questions that were unanswered. So we've asked Touche Roche to report back to myself by the end of March, recognizing the urgency of the situation so that we can do a thorough economic analysis. So in the event that we do involve ourselves in any incentives, they do flow through to the farming population. And there is a real concern as it relates to the economic benefits, and I want to do this on a very sound basis, and that is why we asked for Touche Roche to further investigate the study that had as many questions as it did answers.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Given the fact that our neighboring provinces to the east and to the west have offered tax relief for fuels containing ethanol, and in the absence of a national policy at present to create a level playing field, will the minister assure this Assembly that he will take the necessary steps to ensure that Alberta's position is competitive in attracting potential development?
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to report to the honourable member that we will leave no opportunity unexamined, and we are looking to the federal government as to what initiatives they might pursue, as there was a statement at the former Ag Outlook Conference as it related to ethanol. In addition to that, as the honourable member is aware, we do have a direct incentive for ethanol production whereby they are exempt from the tax that is presently on gasoline within the province of Alberta.
Mr. Stetler. Okay. Supplementary Vegreville, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We dealt with this in fall, and surely the minister recognizes that our incentive program is 1/10 the value of the incentive program in place in Saskatchewan. I'm wondering, is the minister willing to make a commitment to bring our program in line with our neighbouring province, so that if an industry is to develop in Western Canada, it's got as much of a chance of developing in Alberta as in Saskatchewan?
Good question.
Mr. Speaker, what I'm more than happy to do is take the honourable member's advice that was advocated by the leader of his party, whereby we should work closely with the federal government in developing national policies for the benefit of agriculture, and that's what we're going to do.
Thank you. Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary on this questions to the Minister of Environment. I'm sure the Minister of Environment is aware that the big demand for alcohol-related fuels is to cut down the amount of carbon monoxide in the air. Is the Minister of Environment contemplating changes in the air regulations or the air pollution regulations in this province so that gasoline containing alcohol will have to be purchased?
Is it okay now, Mr. Speaker, to proceed? Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago, I had the pleasure of serving as the Canadian President of the Canadian Council of Resource and Environment Ministers, and all members will recall at that time in 1986 that certain initiatives were taken on the Canadian level with respect to the reduction of lead in fuels. And those changes are now in place and will be implemented over the next several years so that, in fact, pollution as a result of vehicle emissions will be greatly reduced in our province and our country. We believe very strongly that such a standard must apply to all of Canada, not simply to the province of Alberta, and we led in that regard. I think it's also very important as well, Mr. Speaker, that we amplify what the Minister of Agriculture has also already indicated, that 1 year ago, when the provincial treasurer brought down the new budget, that in fact there are very significant advantages for the use of propane, methanol, ethanol, and natural gas in terms of vehicle usage in our province, and it's a very significant incentive of 5 cents per litre.
Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
My question, Mr. Speaker, is to the provincial treasurer and concerns the code investigation. The government has repeatedly refused to grant legitimate requests for a full and fair public inquiry into the activities of the principal group and the government's role therein. Instead, the government caused, Mr. Speaker, the code investigation to be established under the Business Corporations Act. Has the provincial treasurer decided to review this decision in the light of the legal challenge mounted by Mr. Comey?
Mr. Speaker, I think the decision as to the form of review of the principal affair is, in fact, before the court right now, and it's my understanding, Mr. Speaker, that a decision with respect to the application made by the Comey family will be concluded this morning sometime. So I think, Mr. Speaker, that before I start making any recommendations as to changes, we should hear what the court has to say, and I know that the member from Strathcona, who is a member of the bar, would certainly respect that position.
Just slight direction from the chair, honourable members. 23G of standing orders, sub judice convention again. I think from the reporting that clearly the onus of responsibility is on the asker of the question as also the minister attempting to respond along the whole line of whether the issue is before the courts, and it is clearly before the courts and awaiting decision.
I'm very cognizant of that, and I carefully am asking my questions, so I do not presume anything about the court decision. Whichever way it goes, it's full of the possibility of delay. And in view of that,
Order, I hesitate to apologize again, but the beeper's gone for the end of question period, so I will attempt to give the honourable member more time to deal in a careful way. Do we have unanimous consent of the House to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Honourable member.
In the light of that great possibility for delay, whichever way the decision goes, what inquiries has the Treasurer made as to the options available in the light of this challenge?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, with respect to the potential for any delay, what has happened, Mr. Speaker, is the application was argued before Mr. Justice Berger on Monday, the 14th of March. However, that has not at all delayed the process itself. Mr. Coate is continuing with his inquiry. As of today, the testimony is being taken. I can't see anything, Mr. Speaker, which would suggest that there would be a delay. So on that point alone, I think that is a question of judgment as to whether or not there would be delay. My judgment is it will not be delay under any circumstance. But it should be known, Mr. Speaker, that in any event, pending the decision, Mr. Berger, this morning, we have obviously thought through several contingency plans which we would implement, and we will wait, however, to see what Mr. Berger's conclusion is before we would even outline those. But I can assure all members, including those members from Strathcona, that we have given considerable thought to that possibility.
Well, thanks for sharing them with us. But counsel for the principal investors, Mr. Robert White, Mr. Speaker, has stated publicly that the Coate investigation was developed as a result of negotiations between the government and those acting on behalf of Mr. Cormie. And my question, Mr. Speaker, is will the Treasurer answer whether it continues to be government policy to deal in the back room with those representing the rich and the powerful?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, there is no substance to support the implications left in the member's questioning. I know that he may think he's a Perry Mason in some places, but here he has to answer when he makes these kinds of misleading statements with respect to backroom agreements. What should be on the record here, Mr. Speaker, that is with respect to the application made before Mr. Berger, that in fact the province, together with the Inspectors' Council and the investors, took the same position in arguing against the move by the Cormie family. So clearly, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the legal arguments, it is a matter of record that the government, along with the investors and the Investors' Council, took exactly the same position with respect to the Coate inquiry and maintained specifically in our arguments that the Coate inquiry should continue. Mr. Speaker, the argument before the court is, and I'm not going to interpret the law, and when my colleague, the Attorney General, gets nervous when I do these things, what is before the court, Mr. Speaker, is that in fact the rights of the individual under the Charter may well be infringed. What remains, Mr. Speaker, is that under both options, the Coate inquiry option or a public inquiry option, we must come back to this legislature to seek the legal right to pass that. In both cases, this legislature has given us the right to do either a public inquiry or to pursue it under the Business Corporations Act. The constitutional strength for that comes from this legislature, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we think, in terms of legal arguments, we want to see the outcome of Mr. Berger before we come to any conclusion as to how we will possibly react to his decision.
Mr. Speaker, yes, Mr. Speaker, perhaps the honourable member did not hear my question. It concerns not the course of the inquiry, but the genesis of it in the back room. And since it has become clear that the government lacked the political will to get tough with Mr. Cormie before it was too late. How does the government justify the subordination of the protection of the public to political advantage?
Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that if there's any suggestion that the province assisted the Cormie family, the record does show that, in fact, we canceled the contracts on June the 30th, 1987. To me, that is not at all collusion with the Cormie family, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Little Bow, followed by Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the provincial treasurer. The government of Alberta is paying the accounting and legal fees of the code inquiry. Could the minister indicate whether the fees of and the charges of the Cormie family are included in those payments?
Speaker, similar to the precedent set with all inquiries, whether under the Corporations Act or under the Public Inquiries Act, there is clear precedent in Alberta that the costs of legal fees are totally borne by the province. With respect to the Cormie question, if there is any finding of wrongdoing, then the costs will not be shared.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Treasurer. It's clear that no matter what or how the code inquiry is structured, Mr. Speaker, the code inquiry will not be able to review the demise of every single major financial firm in this province over the last 7 years. And without looking at those failures, we will not be able to learn of the common themes, the common reasons. Sensitive point.
Honourable member, order please. The honourable member is violating the graciousness of the House about allowing this whole question to carry on. This is a supplementary question, please.
We will not be able to learn from the common themes of that failure to find out how to build a financial industry for the future. What steps is the Treasurer taking at this time to review the failure of the financial industry more broadly and to develop policies and initiatives that will allow a financial industry to be created and develop in the future in this province?
God save me from the temptation, Mr. Speaker.
Consider yourself saved, honourable member. It's been a long time since I had a chance to save anyone from temptation. Including myself. Perhaps we could now have orders of the day called and revert to some other business of the House. Clerk, orders of the day. All right. Might we have unanimous consent of the House to revert to the introduction of special guests? Thank you. First, I would recognize the member for Edmonton Strathcona, then the Minister of Hospitals, and then the member for Whitecourt.
I'm obliged, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Mo Sihota, the member for Esquimalt Port Renfrew in the British Columbia government, seated in your gallery, Mr. Speaker. That's to say, the member for Esquimalt Port Renfrew in the British Columbia legislature, and the justice critic, therefore my counterpart, in that caucus. Perhaps Mr. Sihota will stand and receive the welcome of the Assembly.
That's right. Minister of Hospitals.
My pleasure this morning to introduce 23 grade 9 students from the constituency of Smoky River from the Girouville School. They're here touring our legislature. It's a pleasure to have them on the first full day of the legislative session after the opening yesterday. They're seated in the members' gallery accompanied by teachers Robert Owens and Lorraine St. Andre. I'd ask them to rise and receive the recognition of the Assembly.
Member for Whitecourt.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure this morning to introduce to you some 28 grade 6 students from the Entwistle Elementary School in my constituency. They're seated, I believe, in the members' gallery. I can't see them. I hope they are. They're accompanied by their teacher, Doug Tomlinson, parents, Mrs. Kowalenko and Mrs. Rose, and the bus driver, Mr. Tufty. I'd ask them to rise and receive the welcome of the Assembly.
Speaker, I rise this morning to ask unanimous consent of the House. And, Mr. Speaker, I may say that I believe it is the first of 3 unanimous consents that have been agreed upon between House leaders this morning.
Are there any opposed? Unanimous consent has been received. The member for Redwater, Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 1988, a very important year for the thousands of